In this video, we're going to create a transaction log functionality, which is going to be accessed by event organizers so that they can see a list of transactions within a certain date range, so that they can see how much money they made and the detailed transactions. And for that purpose, first of all, we need to create a transactions entity, which is going to be in turn creating a transactions database table within SQL Server. So let's go ahead and go to this entities folder and try to create a transaction entity. And of course, we're going to just call it transaction. First of all, it's going to have a primary key. It's trying to generate this thing for me. But just looking at this, I don't think I will accept most of that. So I'm just going to start typing my own property here. So first of all, I'm going to have a transaction ID. Right? And then we will have a RSVP ID. So this is going to be used as a foreign key to refer to, because every time you have a transaction, you will have a RSVP. Only RSVP will generate a transaction, because RSVP, you can cancel the RSVP, which creates a refund transaction, right? And you can RSVP itself creates a charge transaction. So we have two types of transactions. We have charge transactions, we have refund transactions, right? And those ones will be related to RSVP. So therefore, we're referring to the RSVP record by the primary key of the RSVP table. So this is going to be a foreign key. And then we will store the payment date. So I'm going to say date time, and then I'm going to just call it payment date. Right, so payment also includes unpayment, which is refund, right? So I'm just going to call it payment date. And then we will have amount. So decimal is a good data type for storing amount. And of course, we will have, I don't want to have a payment method. I can have a transaction type. And then we'll store also status. Status is already stored within RSVP, but we have two columns. One is the payment status. The other one is refund status. So I think it is okay to have a tiny little bit duplication here to store status over here so that we are clear for each transaction what the status is. And then finally, we will have a RSVP navigation property here, right? So we can have RSVP, and then we just navigate to the RSVP entity. So here, our RSVP is created as a virtual property here, right? We don't have to use virtual, because if we are planning to use lazy loading, do we actually need to use virtual? Otherwise, we don't have to use virtual. And if we are seeing that one property that is needed for lazy loading purpose, then we can come here and modify it so that it becomes a virtual navigation property. So we have transaction, and this is good. Now we need to go to RSVP in order to create a navigation property back to the transaction table, right? To transaction entity. So over here, I'm going to create, we can say navigate back to transactions. Let's see, it generates this for me, and this is good. I can have a question mark here. It's okay that if it's empty. All right, so this is good. Now, once we have the transaction entity added, we need to go to application DB context to configure it, right? First of all, here we will have a new DB set that represents a table, database table. So this is going to be the transaction table, and call it transaction. Now, add the, and over here, we can say model builder, not common, but transaction, and it has one RSVP. And why is it? So it says transaction doesn't have a definition for RSVP. I thought we created one. Oh, RSVP. Maybe we can just change it to RSVP, and this will solve the problem. Come back over here. This should be gone in a while. Okay, now it's gone. So with many transactions. So R goes to transactions, and then has foreign key RSVP ID. So this is good. Okay, so now we're done with the entity framework core side of things. Now we can use the transactions table in order to record the transaction. One of the places we record transaction, actually we have two places. One is cancel, the other one is making payment. Cancel is right here, right? So we can go to cancel over here. And then within this method, cancel RSVP async here, right, we can add something right here within this if statement. So only when we have a event that actually has a ticket price do we actually need to have the transactions. Otherwise, it's just a free event that doesn't have any money transaction, right? So here we can create a transaction, right? And we can call it transaction. So new transaction, and then we're gonna have RSVP ID, which refers to the RSVP. So now it generates something for me. I'm gonna accept it and then examine it. Okay, so amount is RSVP event ticket price value. That's why it doesn't like it, right? But this is going to be a negative amount, so I'm gonna add a minus sign over here to negate it. And then we will have the payment date. Payment date is actually right now. In this system, we're not using UTC time, but if you're creating a event management system that can be used across different time zones, then of course you try to choose to use UTC. I just don't want to deal with the complexities of UTC, and then you have to, according to different culture and different settings within your browser, display the time differently. So I don't want to get into that part of the complexity. I want to show the core functionalities of a meetup system, right? An event management system, and more or less making this system full featured. But something like dealing with time zones, I don't want to be included in here. Okay, now transaction type. We have refund and we have charge. Following the pattern that we have been using, the convention, we are using this shared helper here. But of course, like I mentioned several times, that it might be easier to just, not only easier, but better to use enumeration. Nevertheless, we already started using this shared to store some hard-coded string. We can continue doing that. So over here, I'm gonna create another one, and this is going to be called transaction. This is going to be transaction type, not transaction type, but transaction type dash charge. So this is going to be a charge transaction, and this is, I'm going to just call it charge. Okay, and then we will have a refund, and now it's smart enough to know that. Now let's scroll down over here, and we will have transaction type charge, and the second one is transaction type refund. So that's pretty good. Now let's go back to cancel, and here we're not going to use hard-coded refund, but we're going to use it through shared helper here. So this is a refund transaction, and the status will be from the refund object status. So once we have the transaction object created, we're going to save that into context.transactions DB set, right? We're going to add that to the DB set. And then we're going to invoke the save changes in order to actually add the transaction into the database table. So we completed this cancel part of the functionality. Now we have making payment. Okay, so cancel is right here, and then we have making payment. So this making payment success component is going to be actually triggered by the browser, because once the Stripe finishes the payment, then it's going to redirect to this URL. And this is where we're actually trying to finish the RSVP process. And right now, before we change anything, we're hitting this URL. So what is this URL? This URL is a RSVP event endpoints that we created right here. Yesterday, when I was preparing for today's video, I have gone through this whole process and several hours of pain dealing with this. So essentially, the pain that I was having is if I try to reuse this functionality. First of all, this endpoint was created for only one single purpose, is because we're using vertical slice architecture. I didn't want to just share the RSVP event service between the RSVP and the payment, right? See, the RSVP event service is a core service, one of the core services that are actually being accessed by multiple different slices. The first slice is RSVP event itself. The second slice is making payment, because once you make the payment, you need to RSVP, right? So in order to avoid sharing the RSVP event service, right, by strictly following the vertical slice architecture. Remember, this is actually the first time I'm trying to use vertical slice architecture, right? That's why I'm making this video. One of the reasons I'm making this whole series of video to show you the pain that I experience. Now, this RSVP event service needs to be shared, but I want to also follow vertical slice architecture. That's why I found this compromise that I thought it's a good compromise. I thought I could just use API endpoints, right? And this can be used by the RSVP event service slice itself, as well as making payment. And that's what we did in the past. And I was thinking it was actually a smart way to do it. But then yesterday when I was preparing for today's work, this becomes such a pain. Because you see, let's go back to payment success component over here. So here, I'm navigating to that URL, and then that URL, which is the endpoints, right? The minimal API endpoint is going to handle the whole work. And I don't expect anything to come back from here. But we have transactions. What does it mean? It means that I need to know the RSVP ID now in order to create a transaction record. But this navigate to, it basically just navigate to there, it doesn't return anything. So I thought, okay, let's actually change this so that it actually returns the RSVP ID. And then in order to actually grab that response from the minimal API, I also needed to change this payment success component to instead of just navigate to the endpoint, I'm trying to trigger it with HTTP client. Just like you trigger any web API endpoint. I ran into severe problems where, in this endpoint, I need to access emails, I need to access different information in the cookie. But once you use a client, you lose all of that. In order to preserve, in order to still have the email claims, all of the claims information, you have to use Navigation Manager. But now that I use client, I lose all of that information. And also, this itself has a security concern. Right? So that's why we added this require authorization. And then once you use the client, this require authorization basically just take you to Google account and it asks you to log in. So your attempt to trigger this minimal API endpoint through the client is always going to fail. First of all, you have to remove this require authorization. Otherwise, it's going to just return HTML. What is that? It's just Google account login page, right? So once you remove that, and then you will realize that the cookie doesn't work. So I went through this whole pain and eventually I thought, why don't we just share this RSVP event service? Why don't we just drag this into the services folder under the share folder here? Although this is vertical slice architecture, but those core functionalities that are being used in multiple slices should be shared. Otherwise, we're creating something very impractical, right? So that's what I want to mention today, and that's what I did yesterday for preparing today's video. So instead of continuing using this event endpoint, I removed it, and then I just dragged this one to the shared services folder, and then everything becomes easy. You gotta make sure you only share the services that have to be shared. Right? Those services that are actually being used in different slices. And you have to also make sure that it's not just getting one value from database, right? In our RSVP event service, it's quite complicated. It is doing a lot of things. So in this case, it's worth it to actually share it. If you're just getting something from database, you can just use entity framework code to get it. So literally, it's not actually duplicating your code. Right? You just pull the data from the database. So in that case, I don't think we need to share it. For example, if you just want to grab an event, right? You just want to get event. So this code, these two lines of code, if you want to do it in a different slice, you can just do it, right? Don't need to worry about duplication. Don't have to share this view event service. But for something that is complicated, involves different steps, but also shared between different slices, then I think it makes sense to actually be shared in the shared folder, not just hold it within the slice. Okay, so therefore, what we're gonna do here today is, first of all, we're gonna drag this thing into the services folder, and then I'm gonna say okay to modify the namespaces, adjust namespaces. I say yes. Okay, so that's good. That's one thing. And secondly, I don't need this RSVP event endpoint anymore. But we're going to keep this here for a little while because you see that after the process, we need to redirect the user to different places. I just need to remember these different places so that I can implement them in those two different slices. Okay, let's keep this file in here for a little while, and then later we're going to delete this. Okay, now let's go back to our payment success component. So we're going to change this to use the shared RSVP endpoint in order to do the RSVP. So we're going to remove this line because we are not going to use the endpoint anymore. So what are we going to do here? First of all, we need to RSVP, right? Because this is the page when the payment is finished. The payment is made. Stripe redirects us back to this URL. And first of all, we need to RSVP and create the RSVP record, right? And once we have this record, we will have a RSVP ID. And once we have the RSVP ID, then we can record a transaction, right? We can record a transaction. Now, we just need to use the RSVP event service to actually do the RSVP. So we need to come over here and just inject the RSVP event service like this. And I'm going to come over here and use it. So I'm going to call the RSVP event async method, and we need to pass in the event ID. Here we have the event ID, but it's in string, so we will need to do a parsing. So event ID, and then this one requires the email. So for email, we need to grab it from our base component, not base page, base component, and base component. Why it says that? Let's int. Okay, so there's a typo here. Now it's much better. Then we can say base user email. Okay. The third one is the payment ID, which we can grab from session. So session, the payment intent ID, and then the last one is the payment status. So again, we can say session and payment status. Okay, so now this one is a async method. We're going to use the await keyword, and we're going to grab the RSVP ID from it. So we have the RSVP ID from this method. Let's go into that to confirm. So this RSVP actually doesn't return us the RSVP ID. So we need to change this to give us the RSVP ID. So first of all, we're going to change the return type to integer, and then we're going to return 0 if we cannot RSVP. And if we can RSVP, then here we're going to return RSVP record and the ID, which is the RSVP ID. So here, after saving the changes, we will have this RSVP ID populated within this object, right? So therefore, we can return the RSVP ID from here. So now let's go back. Now we're returning RSVP ID here, okay? And all we have to do is to test it first. So if RSVP is greater than 0, which means that we have succeeded doing the RSVP. And then, first of all, here, we need to record the transaction. So how do we record the transaction? This is going to be similar to what we did in the cancel, but we don't want to directly create the transaction object and then use the from core here. So we want to use it within the service. So we are under making payment service. Therefore, we are going to create another method inside this service here, and we can call it record transactions, right? So let's see whether it can help us to generate this record transaction thing with, let's say, I'm going to record transaction by providing RSVP ID and payment status. So let's see whether it can generate something for me, but it doesn't do anything. Let's start typing. Sometimes when you start typing, it starts to react. So we're going to return whether it's successful or not. So record transaction async, and we're going to pass in the RSVP ID as well as the payment status. It doesn't generate the code for me today, so we will have to do the work ourselves. First of all, we need to grab the context by using the context factory, and I'm going to say create db context. Now we need to grab the RSVP record, right? So RSVP equals await context RSVPs, and we need to have the event because we want to grab the ticket price from the event object. So therefore, when we want to say include, and I'm going to say R goes to our event, and we need to grab it by using first async, and then I'm going to say R goes to r.rsvp equals to the RSVP ID. So now if RSVP is not now, and at the same time RP.event is not now, and at the same time RP.event.ticket price has value, and if all of that is true, we finally have to make sure that the ticket price value is actually greater than 0, which means that we have a ticket price, right? We have a ticket price, and this is when we want to record the transaction. So we're going to come over here, we're going to say transaction, and transaction equals new transaction. So this is going to be similar to what we did in the cancel. We need to store first of all. So there is a problem here. I think this is because this is in the system.transactions names, right? This is not what we want here. So it automatically imported this one, what we want in the entities here, right? So it is this meetup. Let's go over here and replace this with our own. Now, if we come down, we should be fine now. So we have, first of all, RSVP ID. This is going to be equal to RSVP ID that we have from the parameter here. And then we have payment date, which is right now. And then the amount is going to be from the ticket price. And then we have transaction type. And for this particular transaction type, it's going to be shared helper charge, right? This is a charge transaction type. And then the status comes from the payment status parameter. Okay, so now we have the transaction record right in here. And we're going to use context transactions, right? We add to the collection. Once we add to the collection, we can then save it. Await context save changes. And at the very end over here, we want to return true. Actually, is there a need to return true or false from here? Probably not. So let's actually change this one to return nothing. So let's go back to the place where we actually use it. This is going to be in the payment success component right here, right? So if RSVP ID is greater than 0, then first of all, we are going to use the make payment service, and we're going to record the transaction by providing the data here. And it's complaining because the automatically generated thing isn't working. We don't need all of these parameters. We just need the RSVP ID and the status. Now the rest query line is gone. So finally here, what are we going to do? Remember, I still keeping this RSVP endpoints, right? So this endpoint, if it's successful, it's going to take the user over here. So I'm going to copy this and then come back over here. So remember, this is payment success. Payment success also involves the RSVP, right? So we RSVP'd, we record the transaction, and then we're going to take the user to the same place. Of course, over here, I don't have the context and response object. I'm going to use navigation manager, which is actually easier, right? Navigation manager, navigate to, and we're going to go to this place. So here I don't have user ID, but I can access the user ID from the base class here. Okay, so this is good. So if we don't actually have the RSVP ID, then where are we going to go? We're going to go to the error page. So navigation manager, and we take the user to RSVP-error. So let's re-examine the RSVP-error page, which is right here, takes a event ID. So we need to pass in that event ID. So I'm going to use string interpolation, and then I'm going to add a slash and add the event ID right here. So this is going to be good. And the recording transaction, the comment is right here, but I need to move the comment up. Okay, so this is good, right? This is good. So we completed the two places. The first one is the cancel, right? When we cancel, we record the transaction. And then when we successfully make the payment, then we also record the transaction, right? We record the transaction right here. Now, there is another place that we need to change, which is this RSVP event footer component. Because if you scroll down here, remember that we are going to actually remove this RSVP, what do you call this? This RSVP endpoint, right? So this has to be changed by using the shared RSVP event service. So let's remove that. And then now we can dependency inject the RSVP event service is already here. Okay, we don't need to dependency inject anymore, and we just need to use it. So I'm going to say if RSVP event service .svp event async, and then we provide underscore event ID, and then provide the email. Okay. If this one, remember, this one now returns. So let's go over here. It returns the RSVP ID now. We just changed that. This rest query line is because we forgot to use await. So if this is true, if this is greater than 0, then we're going to redirect the user to the place where we actually did it right here, right? We redirect the user to here. Otherwise, we redirect the user to RSVP-error. So let's go back over here and paste it. Okay. Now this user ID, we don't have the base class in the footer component, but we do have the user ID somewhere Where is our user ID? We don't have the user ID. Okay, we need to grab the user ID here. Now it's actually generated for me. So we have the user ID from the claims. So we're grabbing the user ID from the authentication state, and then we use it here, which is perfect. Now here also, let's go back to payment success. Let's copy this thing over, okay, and paste it right here. So if we fail to RSVP, then we need to display this. But where is the event ID, right? The event ID is right here in the event object, and then we say event ID. Okay, so everything is done. Everything is done here. Now it's time to actually remove this endpoint. Say bye to this. It was invention that I created. I was actually pretty happy about it, but then now it turned out to be wrong. So it's just a struggle of using the vertical slice architecture. It has the pros and cons, right? And at the end of the entire series, the entire project, I'm going to review what I feel about the architecture. But at this point, let's continue. So we have completed some work. We completed the work of recording transaction once we make a payment or refund. Now, since we have transaction records, now we need to display the transaction records for organizers. So therefore, we are going to create a new slice, and we can call this view transactions, right? View transactions. So let's go to the feature folder, and then let's create a new folder, and we're going to call it view transactions. Okay, and now I'm going to actually go in here and copy the name, and then I'm going to create a user component, and let's call it view transactions component. Okay, this is going to be a page component. So page directive is the first thing. And because this is a organizer only page, right? So I'm going to start with /org. Because so far, all of our organizer only pages are using this URL pattern /org. Here, I'm going to say org/transactions. And do I need to provide the user ID? I don't, because I can get the user ID from the base class, right? So therefore, I'm going to inherit from the base component. Now AI kicks in. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But anyhow, what about what do you call this? Maybe let's just call it your transactions. Right, you can call it anything. I'm just coming up with this name. It may not be perfect, but let's try to use it. Okay. Now, inside here, we want to have a container. We're using Bootstrap, right? So I'm going to say bootstrap.container, and then we can have a margin on the top, making a space between the title and the container. Okay. Now, inside here, what I want first is to let's try to use AI to generate something. Let's see what it can generate, right? Because I want to use the start date and end date of the event in order to actually filter the transactions. Not the start date of the end date of the event, actually the start date and end date of the transaction in order to filter the transactions, right? I'm going to say create a row containing a filter for begin date and end date. This filter is used to filter out transactions. So I'm going to comment this, right? So Control KC to create a comment, and then I hit enter and see what it generates, right? So it generates something. Let's review this. The problem with this AI generation is that it always forgot to close it. Maybe this is on purpose. And what is going on here? Why it's, because we don't have a begin date and we don't have an end date. That's the problem. So let's first of all create those dates. So date time, and then we have a begin. Okay, so using uppercase here. So let's use uppercase. So we have begin date, and let's initialize the begin date actually. So I'm gonna say date time today at month. So because this is for transactions, you want to show 1 month at least by default. That's why I'm defaulting it to 1 month ago, right? And then we will have end date, which is today. And it's automatically generated. This is pretty good, right? So we have begin date, we have end date, and then we filter transactions. So what's this for? Okay, so this is just a method. So let's create this method. I don't know whether this is going to be a void or something. Let's use void first. Okay, so this is good. And let's review the markup and see whether this is good or not. So we have a empty for. This is good. Align items, form label, begin date, start start date, form control, looks pretty good. It looks pretty good to me. Okay, so we have this within the container. Now, the second part of the container is going to be containing transactions. So first of all, we will have a a list of transactions. Right, so we are not gonna have transaction view model because we don't allow users to actually manually enter transaction. So we can just use transaction. This is transaction as well. So we have this transaction over here, right? And we are going to go over here and say if transactions is not null, and at the same time, if transactions count is greater than 0, then we can have something. So again, I can use AI to help me. I'm going to say create HTML table to display transactions with end footer. What is it trying to say? The table should have the columns. Okay, so it's trying to generate some details. I want to display event title, amount, yes, and I want to display transaction type, status, and I want to display payment date. Actually, the amount is going to be at the last column. Okay, now I'm going to comment this, Control K, C, and then I'm going to hit enter to see what it generates. Okay, it generates me a table. Again, I need to manually close it myself. Okay, and I see event title. I'm going to just call it event. And then amount is the last one, which is pretty good. And then we have transaction type, status, payment date. That's pretty good. And then we have this loop transactions. Well, this is because I'm using uppercase here. I'm going to change the ones to lowercase. Okay. And then change the ones to lowercase as well. And we don't have event title. We have RSVP. And then we have within RSVP, we have event. And then we have title, and then transaction status and the payment date. Should I use this format? That's fine. We can use this format. And then amount. That's fine. This all look pretty good, right? And then I want to have a footer as well. Oh, the footer already generated for me, but it's not complete. But this is fine. This is fine. I'm going to just change it. Total amount. Okay. I need a total amount. And then transactions dot, I'm going to do a summary of transaction T goes to T amount. That's correct. And this is all correct. Okay. And then I'm going to close the TR. And then I'm going to close the footer. So T foot, that's good. All right. Now, when I filter transactions, what do I do? So I need to get all of the transactions based on user ID, which is the organizer ID, and then the start date and the end date. So because of that, I'm going to create a service for this particular slice here. So I'm going to add a class, and then I'm going to call it view transactions service CS. Okay, within this, I need to use database to do the query, right? So I will inject the DB context factory for application DB context. And then this is going to be context factory. I'm doing control.on to initialize the field. And now I'm going to, it's already generating this for me. So let's see whether this is good enough or not. Get transactions, because I have multiple filters. I have the organizer ID, and then I have datetime, right? And then I have the begin date, and I also have the end date. Okay, let's take a look at the code here that is generated directly for me. So we get the context, that's okay. And then we have transactions, getting transactions by using DB context here. So we are including RSVP, yes, because we're trying to pull out some information from RSVP, including the event information, right? So we are including RSVP, and then within RSVP, there is a navigation property that points to the event. So therefore, we were saying that R, which refers to a record of RSVP, it goes to R event. So we're including RSVP from transaction, and then we're including event from RSVP. And now we're providing some conditions here. So we're saying that RSVP.user_ID, well, we're not limiting the user ID of the RSVP. We're limiting the event. So it's not that. It should be t.rsvp event.organizer ID. And then this equals to the organizer ID in the parameter. And also, we're filtering by the payment date. So when I say payment date is greater or equal to the start date, the begin date, and also the payment date is less or equal to the end date. Remember, this end date is passed in through the filter, is through the filter section. And that one has a date, right? It has a date of today's date. But today's date doesn't include today's date. When you generate it, it's going to be like it only, right? Date only. So it doesn't have the time. The time will be 000, which means this is the beginning of today. And then if we use this, it's going to exclude whatever that has happened within today, right? So therefore here, I need to add 1 day to the end day. We need to do this. And then we can run the to list to get the transactions, and we're returning the transaction, right? Now we're gonna take this and go to program.cs. I'm gonna do control comma and then program.cs. Right, we go over here and then we are going to inject this, add transient. That's it. So now we can close this and try to use this view transaction service to filter. We go to the top and we're gonna say inject the view transaction service, and then we go to the bottom over here. We're gonna say transactions equals to, we already have the transactions variable defined here, and we're gonna say view transaction service dot get transactions async. So this is async method, right? So therefore we can add a wait over here, and then the parameter is first of all the organizer ID. So who is the organizer? It's the one that is using this page, right? The one that is using this page or viewing this page. And having said that, we need to limit the access to this page. Okay, and we're gonna say attribute, and we're gonna use the authorize attribute, not automapper, but authorize. And then it's red squiggly line. That's why we need to import namespace. So control dot import name. And the first parameter is policy. It's not first parameter, but we need to specify the first parameter because this is a organizer, right? Organizer only. Let me see. I'm gonna do a search, make sure I'm spelling it correctly. Okay, so this is organizer only. So there's no typo here, and only organizers can access this particular page. Right? So the person who logs into this page and viewing this page is the organizer. So we are getting transactions for that particular organizer. We can say base dot user ID, but this is a string. So the parameter of this method requires a integer. So I'm going to parse this, and then we're going to provide the begin date, right? And then we're going to provide the end date. So that's all of the parameter. That's why it's still saying the await keyword. Oh, okay, this is because of didn't provide it as an async method. Now it is okay. We have our transactions, and the transactions will be displayed over here if there is any transaction. It will be displayed over here. We're showing a footer, and then we're using this transactions a link to summarize transactions. And that's basically all the things we need to implement, right? So all we did is actually pretty simple. We declared the transactions object. We defined the transactions table that corresponds to the entity. Then we use model builder to specify a relationship. After that, we just need to go into cancel RSVP to record the transaction. After making payment is successful and RSVP is successful, we need to record the transaction, right? We record transaction in both the refund scenario and making payment scenario. At the end, we will need to display a new slice, view transactions. Right now, I think we're not done yet. We need to also display a button. This is similar to the become organizer component. If we search become, you will see that it's being used right here in the main layout, become organizer component. In the top bar, we can display my transactions. For that purpose, we're going to create another user component here. This is going to be view transactions button component. I'm going to delete this title here. What we need to do is similar to become organizer. We're going to display this area here, and we only display it if the current logon user is actually a organizer. So we can basically copy this whole thing, paste it over here, and we don't need a navigation manager. We don't need any logic here. We just need to bring the user to transactions page, and then I say my transactions, and then I can just say view transactions button component. I can use it in the main layout there, main layout here. So this is going to be, maybe we can just place it right here. I don't know exactly where we should place it, but view transactions button component. I'm gonna remove this and then just close this and then do a control dot to import a namespace on the top and import it over there. Now let's run the application and see what happens. Okay, there's a build error. We have this, because we removed the RSVP endpoints, now we need to remove it over here. Now if we run it and it still has error, this time we're missing a semicolon over here. That's fine. Let's add the semicolon. Let's run it again. Okay, now our application is trying to run. All right, our application is running. We don't see the button over here because, first of all, I haven't logged in it. Secondly, whether I'm a organizer or not, it doesn't really know. So let me try to, first of all, log in as a regular user. Okay, now I'm not an organizer and this view transactions thing is not here. And let's go to our database. Let's take a look at the tables. So we do have a record here, right? And it's a cancel. This is in the RSVP. Now, I haven't even run the migration yet. It's not gonna work. So let's actually run migration first. Let's go to Package Manager console, add migration, and then I say add transactions table. Okay, try to add that. And it says build fail. Let's see what will happen if here. I was having this define static websites, web assets. I think somewhere in my application there's a duplicate resource, but I'm not able to locate it. So I'm gonna just use this .NET. I found that I don't actually need to use .NET Clean. I can just use .NET Build and it's gonna work. So hopefully it's gonna work. I'm gonna do the add migration again, and then you can see that build actually succeeded. All right, now I'm gonna do a update database. So update dash database is gonna use the latest migration to update the database. Okay, it's trying to run the migration. Now it should be there. Our new table, let's refresh and you will see we have the transactions table, right? So that's pretty good. But first of all, let me clean up the RSVP. So delete from RSVP. I'm gonna run it. And the only record is, right, there's nothing in the RSVP. I'm already logged in as a, not running anymore. Okay, so I'm already logged in as a regular user and I'm going to go to, so we're concerned about transactions, which means that I need to use the event that has a price, right? And I'm going to attend and it says, are you sure you want to RSVP for this event? I'm going to say yes. And then I'm going to go through the payment process, select credit card and click on pay. Okay, now it redirects me back and I'm all of a sudden in the manage RSVP event page on this page, upcoming events, my past events. All right. So if we do a search and we see that we have a RSVP and it says going, status is going, right? And payment status is paid. We don't have a refund, right? And now if I log out and log back in as the organizer of this event, I'm going to log out and I'm logging with Google. And then I'm going to select the organizer. And now I'm seeing my transactions button. This is pretty good. And then if I click on my transactions, I see this filter here and it goes back to 30 days. So April 22nd to May 22nd, and that's today's date. And if I click on filter, then I see this. There's something displayed right here. There's something. So I gotta clean it up, which is actually this one. So there is and this one displayed right here. And also let's count columns. So we have 1, 2, 3. We have the event, we have the event type, status, payment date, and amount. So we have 5, and here we have 5. And then this is 4, this is correct. Okay, everything looks correct. Let's do a hard reload. Hopefully the page is gonna be refreshed. Okay, so that's correct. See, the last column is gone, and the closing bracket is also gone. So we have this meditation event. This is a charge type of transaction. Status is paid and the payment date is this, amount is $250. This is really good. So now let me log out. Okay. And I'm going to log in again as a regular user. Okay. And now if I go to manage my own meetup and then click on cancel RSVP and ask me to confirm, this is going to cancel my stuff. And if I go over here, there's nothing left. There's no upcoming event, which means cancellation is done properly. Let's log out and log back in as a organizer of that particular event. And then I go to my transactions. I should be able to see two records now. So one is paid, one is refund, right? Refund succeeded. Charge is also paid, but it's the same user. Oh, you know what? I need to display the user information as well, right? So I have $250 and I have $250 minus, and total amount is 0. So here I need to display the user information. So for that, I need to, let's see which column. Event, transaction type, status, payment. Maybe let's call it paid by, or yeah, let's call it paid by. Just before the amount, here we have TD, but inside the transaction, right? And we have RSVP, right? We do have a username here. And let's try to use the username here if we can get it. But then here, this has to be changed, column span to number 5. And of course, we need to change this method to include the user. So we can say dot then include, and here we can specify the user. So when we say then include, it's referring to event. So this user object doesn't exist anymore. So we will have to re-include RSVP, and then we're going to say then include user. Right? So this is much better. So let's try to run this again and see whether we can get everything correct. All right, let's filter. And now I do have my name included, and the total amount is correct because 250 plus minus 250 is 0. So I didn't make any money because the user has refunded and the refund succeeded. All right, that's everything I want to show you in today's video. I will see you in the next one.